We're on the top of Samaches Amud Beis. So the Gemara raises the following question: Hahu, that pasuk that we've been deriving all this time of Kol Zar Lo Yochel Kodesh, and we said that once she's married to a zar, she becomes like a zar. Mi boile legufe. I needed to teach me that the case of a zar, a person who's not a Kohen, is not allowed to eat truma. The case of a Bas Kohen who wants to eat truma, and she was married to Israel, to a zar, she's not a zar. How can you jump one step forward and assume that a Bas Kohen, insofar as she was married to Israel, she becomes a zar, and she's included in this lav with the Chiyuv Malkus of Kol Zar Lo Yochel Kodesh? I need the pasuk for the straightforward case of a zar who eats truma. And if now you have to find the source for a Bas Kohen who's married to a zar that she's not allowed to eat truma, that's our pasuk who Bas Kohen kisil ish zar, which cannot teach me that bia psula to apostle or poselis. And the Gemara answers trei v'chol zar ksiva. There are two psukim that we have to deal with of v'chol zar. One is Kol Zar Lo Yochel Kodesh, which we said before in Perek Chav Beis pasuk Yud, and that teaches me that a zar is not allowed to eat truma. But there's another pasuk, which is pasuk Yud Gimel in the same parasha. It says Ubas Kohen Kisia Almona Ugrusha Vizera Ein Lo. So we're talking about a Bas Kohen who is married to Yisrael, a zar. Now he dies, or he divorces her. She has no children from this Yisrael. And the Torah says, V'shavel beis avia, she goes back to her father's house. Kinureo milechel avia tochel, she can eat truma, b'chol zar lo yochel bo. And this pasuk is talking about a Bas Kohen married to Yisrael. That's explicit. And it teaches me that in such a case, she's not allowed to eat truma within the Isur La. Because at the end of this pasuk it says Kol Zar Lo Yochel Bo. Is Memela, the pasuk Bas Kohen Kisil Ish Zar is completely redundant, and we derive from it that a bia of apostle poseles le kahuna. So the Gemara asks Vakati mi boile, I need a second v'chol zar lo yochel bo. L'chid Rabbi Yossi Rab Chanina. The Omer Rabbi Yossi Rab Chanina. The Torah says v'chol zar lo yochel bo. This is the later pasuk in pasuk Yud Gimel, not the first one in Yud. And the Torah is being marba an additional isur for a zar. Why do I need a second pasuk for a zar? Says Rabbi Yossi Rab Chanina, Zorus Amarti Lecha V'lo Ba'ninus. We know that a zar is not allowed to eat truma, but we don't know about aninus. We're talking about a Kohen who lost one of his close relatives, and he is now an onen. How do we know that he's enjoined from eating truma as an onen? In other words, achilas truma and aninus are mutually exclusive. So I need this pasuk for the derivation of Rabbi Yossi. And once again, we come back to square one. It is not redundant. It's not free to teach me the Isur Lav of a Bas Kohen who is married to Yisrael. So I need another Lav for the case of a Bas Kohen Anisas Yisrael. I only have one Lav for a Kohen who's an Onen. He's not allowed. He's enjoined from eating Truma. I have another pasuk called Zar Lo Yochel Kodesh to teach me the Isur Lav of a Bas Kohen who's married to Yisrael. She's not allowed to eat Truma. And that's derived from the pasuk Ubas Kohen Kisil Ish Zar. So I no longer have that pasuk Ubas Kohen Kisil Ish Zar as redundant to teach me that a bia to apostle poseles bitruma. The Gemara answers that, you know what? I could derive the conclusion of Rabbi Yossi Rab Chanina from one single word in this pasuk, and that is zar, min zar. The Torah could have written zar, and instead it says v'chol zar. Whenever we have an extra kol in the Torah, that's a ribui, and that ribui is going to teach me the case of an onen. A Kohen who's an onen is enjoined from eating truma nafka, and that's enough. Just that extra v'chol zar is sufficient to derive Rabbi Yossi's conclusion that an onen, a Kohen onen, is enjoined from eating truma. Once again, the Gemara objects. Vakati mi boile. I still need the pasuk bas Kohen kisiel ish zar to teach me that bas Kohen who got married to a zar becomes possible. L'chidesanya for the derivation of the brisa. What does it say in the brisa? So again, we're talking about a bas Kohen married to Yisrael, and he dies or divorces. So she goes back to eat truma bebeis avia. She choseres l'truma. The eno choseres l'chaza v'shok. So amongst the matnas kahuna, we have matonos that are kodesh, and we have matonos that are chulin. So, for example, truma is a matnas kahuna that's kodesh, and she, after her, let's say, almanus or gerushin from her non-Kohen Yisrael, she goes back to Beis Avia and she eats truma. But what about chazav v'shok? Okay, he has a little bit of an introduction here in the footnote number hey. Chazav v'shok mikol zevach shlomin. Oh, so I said it was chulin. He's talking about shlomin. Nesunim lekohen. Hey mimatnos kahuna shenemar yes chazeh hatrufa. V'shok hatruma tochlu v'makom tor ata ubincho bitecha itcha ki chokcha v'chok banecha nosnu nitnu mizivchei shalmei b'nei Yisrael. So this woman who's a Bas Kohen, was married to Yisrael, now she's divorced or widowed, and she goes back to her base of Vir. She can eat truma, but she cannot eat chazav v'shok shel shlomin. The Omer of Chizdam Ravina, Bar of Shiloh, commenting on this brisa, Ma'ikra, how does the brisa know that when she returns to the base of Vir after being widowed or divorced from a non-Kohen husband, she cannot eat shok chazav v'shok? Tichsivu bas Kohen kisiel ish zar, he b'srumas hakadoshim lo sochel. So we're talking about a bas Kohen who is married to a zar. Now he dies or divorces her. She goes back to Beis Avia. And what does the Torah mean? B'trumas hakadoshim lo sochel, lo sochal b'muram min hakadoshim. She cannot eat chazav v'shok from shlomin, which are given as a matana to the Kohen. So it seems that her marriage to a zar has, what word do I want to use, has an indelible, if that word is correct, it's an indelible impact on her status. Not only for the temporary period of time that she's married to this zar, but her marriage to the zar has a permanent impact and somehow lowers her status as a bas Kohen, not just now, But even after he's out of the picture because he died or divorced her and she goes back to Beis Avia, she's not the same as she was before she married him. And it's going to express itself in a certain level of regarding Achila of a certain higher level of Kedusha. That's higher than Truma. As far as Truma is concerned, Shavel Beis Avia. She goes back to her status as it was Meikara of a Bas Kohen. But as far as a higher level of Kedusha, which is called Chazav Shok of Kachim of Shlamim, like I'll give you an example. Truma could be eaten even outside of Yerushalayim, whereas Shlamim have to be eaten within Yerushalayim, so that Shlamim is a higher level of Kedusha. Shlamim has Kedushas Mizbeach. Truma is not Kedushas Mizbeach. It's Kodshe Gvul. Gvul meaning outside of the Mikdash. Whereas the Kedusha of Shlamim is generated by the Beis HaMikdash, by Kodshe Mizbeach. So that even though this Bas Kohen goes back to Beis Avia after her marriage with a non-Kohen terminates, but nevertheless she has now been impacted by that marriage, lowering, so to speak, her status as a Bas Kohen, which expresses itself in the fact that she cannot eat Kodshe Mizbeach of Chazav V'Shok. But once again, we're back to square one. We see that Ubas Kohen Kisi Elish Zar is a necessary pasuk, which cannot therefore teach me that Nivel Apostle of the Bia Poselis or Solid Kahuna. And once again, the Gemara, in its very, shall I say, consistent style, is going to look at the pasuk and see if perhaps we can find some sort of extra word in the pasuk which will indicate that she cannot eat Chazav V'Shok, but the basic pasuk is still redundant. So the Gemara says that there's no question that this pasuk is coming to teach me, right, that Bas Kohen Kisi Elish Zar, that she cannot eat Truma. The whole parsha is talking about Truma. So what did Rav Chizda mean when he derived the conclusion about Chazav V'Shok? Im Kain, if the pasuk is only telling me that she's Psul Kahuna, then, I'm sorry, Psul Truma I meant to say, then Lichtov Kra, he bekadshim lo sochel. Right, it says V'Trumas HaKadoshim lo sochel. Why not just say V'hi bekadshim lo sochel? Leave out the word V'Trumas. The whole parsha is talking about Truma. My V'Trumas HaKadoshim. Why then did the Torah feel compelled to add the word B'Trumos? Shamat me not tarta. It's telling me two drushes. Number one, that she doesn't go back to her father's rishus to eat Chazav V'Shok, which is very interesting that we derive that from the word B'Truma when we were talking about a higher level of Kedusha. And number two, that Bia to apostle Poselis. Gemara asks, Ashkechan Kohenes Levia v'Yisraelis Minoa. True, from the pasuk Bas Kohen Kisi Elish Zar, we derive that a Bas Kohen who had a Bia to apostle, she becomes psula from Achilas Truma. But how do you know from whence you derive the conclusion that if she's not a Bas Kohen, she's only a Levia Yisraelis, and she had a Bia to apostle? How do you know that that generates paslus? Maybe you generate paslus in a case of Kohenes, but not in the case of Levia Yisraelis. So this question, Minolan, is a very fascinating question because, you might have said Balabatish. Well, if a Kohenes becomes Psula and she's on a higher level of Kedusha, how much more so Leviah and the Israelis will become Psula? But the Gemara is operating with the opposite logic, that a Kohenes on her level of Kedushas Kahuna is more sensitive to a Psul Kahuna. A Leviah or Yisraelis who's completely excluded Mufka from the whole concept of Kedushas Kahuna, who says that a Bia Poselis is going to engender in her a Psul Kahuna. So the Gemara answers, Kidi Omar Rabbi Abu Omar Rav. They were going to derive Leviah of Yisraelis from that pasuk, which actually is talking about a Kohenes, based on something similar, Ke'en the Omar Abu Marav, so Gemara later on, Bas Ubas, in other words, if you add the Vav to the word Bas, that itself is enough for a drasha. The Vav is like it's written Ubas twice. It could have said Bas, and it says Ubas, so it means Bas Ubas. So we have a double word Bas. And that's a Gemara later on. He says, Bas Yisrael Shenises Lekoin Ochelis B'Truma, V'yemeis Bala Kohen V'yesh Ben Mamshicha Lechel B'Truma Mishum B'Noah Kohen V'yem Acher Kach Nises LeLevi Asura Lechel Truma U'Muteres Lechel Meiser Meis HaLevi V'yesh Mimenu Ben Mamshicha Lechel Meiser Mishum B'Noah Levi V'yemeis B'Noah HaLevi Choseres Lechel Truma Mishum B'Noah Kohen Ubir Rabbi Abba B'Shem Rav Shalamedim Kain Me'aposuk Ubas the Vav of Ubas Kohen Kisia Almona Ugrusha V'Zera Ein Lo V'Shava El Beis Avia Kinureha. It could have said Bas Kohen, and why does it say Ubas Kohen with the extra Vav? And we learn and derive from the extra Vav that in Meis B'Nah HaLevi Choseres Lechel Truma Mishum B'Nah Kohen. So when she had a ben from her second husband who was a Levi, through that ben she's allowed to eat Maser like a Levi. And she had originally a son from her first husband who's a Kohen that allowed her to eat Truma. But once she got married to a Levi, she can no longer eat Truma. And if she has a son from that Levi, she continues to eat Maser vicariously through the son who's a Levi. Now her son who's a Levi dies, she goes back to eating Truma because she has a son from her first husband who's a Kohen. And all that is derived from the extra Vav. Is Hachanami. Now we go back to our pasuk. It says Ubas Kohen. Kisi alish zar. And once again, we have the extra Vav. And we're going to derive from that even a Leviah or a Yisraelis becomes Psula L'Kahuna. In a case of Nivel L'Apostula, because Bas, it could have said Bas. Ubas, the extra Vav, is including a Leviah and a Yisraelis. Okay, so I think we'll stop here. Let's make a note of where we got up to. And don't go away. Hang in there for one more second if you can.